Well, good morning, Greg Heym. Welcome, our chief economist, who is also a part-time comedian, and we love having you here. But thank you for joining us. This is the third episode of The Lead, so thank you. How do you feel about being our third guest?
I feel a little concerned I wasn't the first guest. You know, what, governors and chairmen rank ahead of me? Is that the way we do things around here?
I'm sorry. This is the best we could do, Greg.
It's all right. I'll get over it.
Well, thank you for being here. I'm really looking forward to talking to you. We always have great conversations. So, Greg, I'm going to start with the basics. Why did you become an economist?
I just went to business school, and it was a process of elimination. I didn't like marketing. Did you hear that, marketing department? Didn't like marketing. Management, I thought, was kind of a made-up subject. So it was between econ, finance, and quantitative analysis. And I was going to change my mind from econ, and then I took my first major level class with Professor Buechner, who's still at St. John's, I think, 40 plus years. And that gave me a whole different outlook on economics, and that it could be interesting and fun. And you know, he taught a lot from the Wall Street Journal, and it was a lot more exciting. And the three professors that really influenced me are all still there. So I'm happy they're there, and it was the right choice. I almost went to law school. I could have been like you, a lawyer at some point.
You still can go to law school, but
I'm too old for that.
But you make it fun somehow. You make it interesting. You have an ability to, you know, sometimes, you know, economists are not typically funny. It's a little dry topic.
They're terrible. You could. The bar is so low.
The bar is kind of low. So you have a lot of charisma. You tell great jokes. You have a great sense of humor. So you add that piece to it, which I think makes you exceptional.
Well, thank you. The key thing is getting people to listen. And, you know, I listen to economists too. So the ones that I tend to like, there's a really great one named Brian Westbury. He's on TV a lot. So I highly recommend his newsletters. And you have to capture not only their attention, but maintain it. And I think to do that, you have to, you know, we come up with funny analogies. And people will remember that more. And one of the big moments in my career was I was at Rebney, and I was at a symposium at the Fed, and the deputy mayor of New York, Fran Ryder, was there, and they were making all these presentations. She had a stack of papers this big, and she said, well, thank you for all this, but this is all completely useless to me, because none of you have told me clearly what I should do. And that's when I realized that, you know, there's two ways economics can go. There's sort of the paper writing, analytical way, and then there's what I think I do, which is really make recommendations, you know, read the stuff so you don't have to read it, and then just tell you what you need to know. And I think it's worked out pretty well.
But how did you get into real estate?
Well, my first job out of college was with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a pretty good place to work as an economist. But I was looking to get out, and a guy I used to play, it's going to sound a little geeky, we used to play computer baseball, the simulation called Pursue the Pennant at lunchtime. A guy I worked with had left to go to Rebney to be the chief economist, and he called me about a year later saying that, you know, he was leaving to go to grad school in California. Was I interested? And the day I found out I didn't get another job I was interviewing for, I interviewed with Mike Slattery at Rebney, and he hired me, and I was there for 8 years. And then, you know, the story of how I came here is kind of funny.
Please share that with us.
I got a call one day from Michael Bloom, who would call me occasionally, about RLS issues. It wasn't called the RLS back then, I don't think, but I can't remember. About, you know, they speak to me about something that project they were doing or something along those lines. And I said, sure. I hung up the phone, and then a couple minutes later, it's Greg, it's Will Zeckendorf. And I said, no, really? He's like, yeah. So, and that was it. And that was almost 18 years ago.
Oh, my God.
So I always thought as an economist at Rebney I'd wind up on the commercial side, because there were no other chief economists, and there still aren't, really in the residential industry. So I've carved out, you know, a nice space, and it's been a great 18 years here.
I love hearing that. I'm gonna keep that portion of this tape that you love it here, and it's been a great 18 years.
No, don't use that in negotiations, no.
Well, Greg, you speak at our meetings. You're a great communicator. Have you always been a great communicator, very articulate? No, I mean it. Like, you do a lot of the meetings for the agents, and we always get a packed house when you do those, I know, with Ruth. And then you do the annual meeting, and you're a natural, you know, not to puff up your ego more. But you are a natural. You're a great communicator and you're funny. Have you always been that way, or did you have to work at it?
I think I get it from my dad. My dad is a really funny guy, always has been. And growing up with three brothers who are all bigger than me, you learn to get your 2 cents in. And I think it was a combination. I have a huge ego. I'm not going to lie about that. I have a tremendous ego. It's almost a necessity for somebody who expects large number of people to listen to them or come to see them. And you've done live TV. You can't sit there while you're waiting for a commercial break to end and hope you're good and think you're good and maybe it'll be good. But performing, I was involved in music my whole childhood, and I got a music scholarship to college. So being comfortable performing, I always tell my son, you may not become a professional trumpet player, although he's a 2-time All-County trumpet player. So I'm very proud of, but this will benefit you later in life because it'll give you, the biggest thing I think people don't realize is it's okay to be nervous when you're in front of an audience. People think sometimes that if they're worried about it, something's wrong with them or they're going to mess up. But I tell my son, that's God's way of giving you the energy to get through, because that little burst of energy helps you hit that first note or the first point, and then once you get focused. I think about what I would want to listen to. I want to hear somebody just recite a bunch of stats that are boring and tell scripted jokes that land flat. In annual meetings, if I'm going to make a joke, it's about something that's happened before, a mistake somebody has made or something like that. And those jokes always land a lot better. But humor, it's a good way to make people feel at ease, and if the jokes are funny, like you.
That's such good advice. A lot of times I think there's this fear to speak in public, to speak in front of people. What other advice would you say to agents to overcome that?
Just do it.
Just do it.
Do it. Get involved, in an organization, or teach at Rebney, or some way, anything you're uncomfortable doing, do it. And one of my, I have 2 really good Barbara Corcoran stories, but one of them was I did a CNBC with her one time, and I was nervous because it was one of the first times I'm ever doing live television.
Scary a little.
And of course I go to her first, and I'm like, what am I going to say? And then after what she said, honestly, I said to myself, I can say something much smarter than that. Sorry, Barbara, but that's when my ego kicked in. But I think that people should get out of their comfort zone and try new things and realize that you don't have to be perfect at it. Billy Joel had the best comment. He goes, I don't think I'm great at what I do. I'm just competent in an era of incompetence.
Wow.
And another great piece of advice I heard once was from one of these rich guys on TV who was saying, do the things that other people don't want to do.
So true.
Research is something people tend to not want to do
That's
on their
right.
own, which is why I'm employed. But I think for people, public speaking, sometimes brokers will ask me, believe in yourself, be prepared. I may look like I don't take this seriously, but I'm very well prepared when I do things. And believe in yourself. If you're not going to bet on yourself, who are you going to bet on?
I love that advice. And, Warren Buffett said that what changed or shaped his life was that he was afraid to speak in public, and he took a class from Dale Carnegie.
Right.
And he learned how to speak in public, and it transformed everything. And
there's 2 ways to do it. You could get media coaches, and you could, I would say for me it's been natural, and just that I have this, again, overinflated ego that my wife would love to come on and talk to you about for a long time. I think it's just understanding, don't let the nervousness get to you. Try to stay focused and practice. That's like anything else.
I think it's such good advice. And you're right, you have to, it's like they say, you have to go into the caves you're most afraid to enter in life. You have to go in, you have to do it. That's what life is about, right? Not a dress rehearsal.
Yeah, the unexamined life is not worth living.
Love that. You have good quotes, Greg.
I also have a really good memory.
You do.
I do.
You do. So let's talk a little bit about your work with Will Zeckendorf on the pied-à-terre tax. How did that all start?
Well, you remember in March or the beginning of 2019, we had a flood at 770, so we were exiled, and I was actually here on the 12th floor, and I got a call from Will saying the pied-à-terre tax, which had been around for several years, but once the Democrats took control of the Senate, it became a greater possibility, and he had just spoken to John Banks, the president of Rebney at the time, that this was a good chance this was going to happen. And then he said something that I wasn't expecting. You have to tell me how much this is going to raise. I'm like, okay, when? He's like, No, today, like, I need to know an estimate because they're saying it's going to raise $750 million and there's no way that's going to happen. And you've got to prove that to me. Like, and this is like 10 o'clock in the morning. He's like, get back to me. He's, come up with an idea. And I said, all right. So then it was like, well, what are we going to do? We can't use the city's valuations for these apartments, so we have to look at sales prices, and then we have to adjust ones that haven't sold recently for inflation, and do all of that. And co-ops, many of them have not sold since those records became public in 2004. So, I did my best to come up with an estimate. It was much lower, and then it started. It all took off very fast, very quickly. Like a week later, we were in Albany.
You guys took the train together to Albany.
We Amtrak'd it, which was fun. Some people have asked, like, what do you and Will talk about? Because it doesn't seem like we're guys that have a lot in common. But we are obviously big sports fans. We're both rabid New York Rangers fans.
And Yankees, right?
And Yankees. It's funny because he thinks I'm a Met fan because he's always like, you root for every loser team because I'm a Jets fan. He's a Giants fan. So he likes to tease me about.
But you guys also love music.
We do. He's obviously an avid record collector. We talked about that. So we've talked a lot. And some of the music that we share, it's one of those things like, I'm a big fan of this band called The Pretty Things that should have been bigger, but it was a 60s, 70s band, kind of like the Stones. In fact, one of the guys was actually asked to be in the Stones. And one time I was telling Eric Gordon about this. And Will's like, did you say The Pretty Things? Like, you don't know anything about The Pretty. I know The Pretty Things. You don't know. So then we started talking, and we share a love of psychedelic and garage music from the 60s, and he's a huge Beatles fan.
We know that.
The big difference is he likes modern music, and I
don't.
Or he'll listen to it, and no, I do not. And I've done everything I can to push my son towards classic rock. So
he loves the Beach Boys. Your
He
son loves the Beach Boys.
Well, who doesn't? I mean,
yeah,
it's
fun.
fun.
It's fun. It is fun. Till your daddy takes the T-Bird
away. Yeah.
Yes.
So we went up to Albany and meeting a lot of the people, being in Brad Holman's office and meeting
Brad Holman, state senator.
Yeah. Not very receptive to any factual arguments about it, and really concerned about his eventual run for Manhattan Borough President.
He was concerned about his narrative, mostly, it seemed.
I think it sounds like a great idea to just tax people who can't vote you out until you realize the amount of money they pour into the city. So then, we kind of knocked it away, and instead we got the transfer taxes and the mansion tax increases, and then it surfaced again the next year, not surprisingly. And it was funny because before COVID, we kept hearing like, oh, we're not going to raise taxes in an election year. We're not going to do this stuff. And then it was like, well, we need the money. And so, during that time, Will really deserves all the credit for really engaging the industry and pushing Rebney to do more. And, hiring, one of the great things that came out of this was I met a new friend in my buddy Tony Manorino at Extel, who we worked very closely with, and reconnected with Martha Stark, one of my old buddies from my Rebney days. And it's funny because now we become like besties.
So nice.
She knows way too much about me. I guess I talk too much. And she's like, I was in Disney, we walked by the Wilderness Lodge. And I said, oh, Greg stays there when he goes. And I was like, wow, what did we talk about on the phone? But there were many late nights of rerunning data. And, we were able to get it squashed this year. And obviously the aid that the city and state got. But it's not going to go away. It's not just Brad Holman pushing this. It's Deborah Glick and many other assembly members and state senators. So I think we have to be vigilant, but it did expose me to something that, even though I worked at Rebney for 8 years, I wasn't on the lobbying side. And obviously, lobbying was much different back in those days. You just, had some donors call, and real estate had a lot more power now. Now, as you know, real estate is almost the enemy.
It is.
An industry that they don't want to take donations from. And Rebney has changed. To their credit, they have changed.
Jim Whalen has done, I think, such a fantastic job leading the charge. And I think that what you and Will and Martha Stark and everybody involved did is you turned the lights on. You educated everybody about what the pied-à-terre tax, what it would mean, the implications. And then you spoke to the agent community. I mean, we rallied thousands of agents, and that's because of all the work that you and Will and everyone did. And so we all owe you guys a big bunch of gratitude for that.
Thank you. And you did a lot of work too, getting the agents on board.
Yeah, we
I
tried.
think it was fun because, when you do something you believe in,
yes.
forget, everybody's individual political beliefs. We all knew how bad this was for the industry, and it was just bad policy. It was going to cost them money. So getting in front of these senators, and we did a lot of them over Zoom, obviously, once the pandemic started. It was interesting. It was interesting to who would listen and who wouldn't listen. Some of them just sat there like this and didn't really care what we had to say. And we knew, but we had to try. But Will really got the ball rolling, and he really supported it and pushed it. And if it wasn't for him, it probably, there's a good chance it would have happened.
That's right. So, but thank you for doing all of that. And I know our work is not done. We're gonna. It's probably will come.
Will told me it's not. So, as long
you might be going to Albany again soon. Let's transition now into the market, the real estate market. What is this first half of the year has been? I don't think anybody could have predicted that it would have been this historic. You did? You thought it was going to be this? Did you really think it would be this much business, this much intensity? I mean, I thought it would be good. I didn't think it would be great.
I think for a couple reasons. When you saw the rebound in the economy, remember GDP went from falling over 30% to growing almost 30% as soon as things reopened. And when you looked at the other markets across the country that were less impacted by COVID, people started buying like mad.
Yeah.
And our offices in Connecticut and Jersey and the Hamptons and Florida obviously did very well.
That's right.
The problem that they have now is the lack of inventory.
Yeah.
And that has driven up prices dramatically. And there are still no existing homes for sales. I mean, you're talking about less than 2 months supply of homes. I'm sure in Palm Beach you're going, we wish we had 2 months supply of homes.
The windows, I was there recently, and they don't have enough inventory to put in the windows. It's
Right.
all New York and Connecticut.
It's a small market to begin with.
It is. It's very small. And now it's been, it's been crazy.
And, there was this flight from density, but I think maybe people learned the lesson from Lehman Brothers that when the sale of the decade is going on, you want to jump in. And I think once the containment became a little better and vaccinations started to pick up, people realized that I'm getting this significantly cheaper than it's worth because of something that's going to go away. And I think with the low interest rates, and the biggest difference that I think people don't realize enough is when we got out of Lehman Brothers, the stock market was over 40% lower, and we had this prolonged recession. And as a market, we had 6 months where nobody bought anything. From Lehman's bankruptcy to March of '09, it was dead.
Yeah,
and the stock market, that's when the stock market bottomed. The difference is once things were reopened here, not only did the stock market come back, but it was at records, and there was optimism abound. And I think that's why all markets in the U.S. right now are on fire in terms of demand. The question is supply. What's good for Manhattan is it had plenty to sell. Now the Hamptons went through this, when COVID started. They had built a lot there, and they had enough inventory, and people flocked. Miami, similar. So sometimes it's good to have too much inventory going into a recession. Prices adjust quicker, and people, will see value and jump on it. And we didn't run out of product like other
places. So what is your prediction for the next year? Let's talk outer markets before we hit New York. What do you think is going to happen in Palm Beach, Connecticut, New Jersey, Hamptons, et cetera?
Well, obviously there's already started in a lot of these places a leveling off of activity. You're not going to see, although now with the Delta variant, I think that we'll see how, the next couple of months go. But with the economy growing and interest rates still remaining at low levels, even with inflation running rampant, I think the demand is still going to be there, but the problem is it's going to be paired. I mean, let's face it, a lot of our markets are not as worried about affordability.
That's right.
Fairfield County and Palm Beach and the Hamptons, it's not
It's
not
discretionary.
Really about
it's more discretionary.
Right. But I there's a lot. We just got, when we're filming this, we just got the GDP report for the second quarter. It was a bit of a disappointment, but the economy still grew at a very strong pace. And hiring hasn't really picked up yet for a variety of reasons. And I think as that picks up, the demand for housing will remain strong. One area that is weak now is new home sales. Again, the prices have crept up, and they haven't been able to build homes fast enough.
They say there's something like the United States needs something like 5 million homes to keep up with the demand.
Well, it's not only that. There's something, that we don't think a lot here called scrappage. Homes only last maybe 70 to 80 years, and then they usually, are torn. In some countries, it's like 10 years before they're torn down. But, just like people have to replace cars, in some cases, homes have to be rebuilt. And we're not keeping up with the pace of that, especially with, these supply chain issues with lumber and steel.
Yeah, lumber went up, I don't know, something like 500%.
Those commodities in general.
Yes.
And look, inflation is a real problem right now. I don't know what's wrong with Jerome Powell and the people at the Fed.
Yeah.
I don't know why they don't get it. And I write a lot in the line, shameless plug, that, he's sort of Alfred E. Newman, just in it, what me worry. The economist I mentioned, Brian Westbury, is always harping on this, and Milton Friedman said it best. Inflation is a monetary phenomenon. Too much money chasing too few goods. We know there are too few goods because of COVID.
Right.
You can't make as much. It's hard to move things. I can't get a PlayStation 5. They came out in November, and I still can't get a PlayStation 5 for my son, and for me too.
Of course, I knew that, but go ahead.
But the scariest thing is, since COVID started, and if you go back to February 2020, the money supply has increased 30%. That's 30%. Never happened before.
It's crazy, yeah.
And I put a chart a couple weeks ago on the line showing, over the last several decades, the money supply never goes down. Like, it's not going to go back.
Yeah.
Prices for goods, lumber will come back down, and other commodities, because at some point supply will catch up to demand. But with that much money out there in people's pockets, and we're already seeing it with a lot of the things that we buy, gas and food and things like that. So that's a real problem. The good news for real estate is that, it will go up along with other prices of things. So it's always been a good inflation hedge, and that's good for our markets. And I think, again, the suburban markets are going to have the same problem that they've had the last year and a half, and that's not enough product to sell.
Right. The demand is there's not enough supply, and the prices have ticked up.
Yeah.
So what do you predict for New York City for the next year?
I think that, we're going to continue to see demand there. Obviously, we're not going to keep setting records for contract signings and closing.
I had an agent yesterday. He put on a one-bedroom for like $4,000. He had 35 people interested, and he rented it within the first hour. And he said he's never been this busy. He said rentals are on fire. That's what he told me.
Right, because, we always think of pent-up demand in terms of sales.
Yeah.
But think about it. The people that got their first job last year didn't have to come here.
That's right.
And that didn't necessarily want to come at a time when COVID was really peaking. So now a lot of those people have been working a year and now have the ability to get their own place and realize they're getting, again, the deal of the decade. And the smart people are buying. I think there's still a lot of opportunity there, but people that still want to sit on the fence are going to find that they missed it.
Yep.
And so I think we're not going to see these levels of activity, but we're going to see a market that's already starting to stabilize. We just released the July inventory report, and it's showing we're getting closer to a neutral market now. We know about the high-end new development market still being oversupplied, but even that has seen some amazing sales.
It's crazy what's going on.
Every time people count a building out or an area out, it just got to show them they're wrong.
It does. And remember, I asked you not too long ago, I said, we're still in a buyer's market, and you said because of the amount of supply, it indicates that could we switch to a seller's market anytime soon?
It's already starting to be in motion. We look at what we call the month supply of homes for sale. So if you had 100 apartments for sale and you typically sell 100 a month, that's a 10-month supply. Anything over 6 is a buyer's market. Anything lower than that is a seller's market. Most segments are still higher than that. But you think about it, in a year they've gone from, in some areas, 20 months to 8 or 9 months. In some areas like the West Side is pretty tight right now. It's under 7 months.
Wow.
So, the areas that tend to be tight, like the West Side and Upper Manhattan, are the ones you expect to move back into the seller's market first. The East Side, Midtown, which have had supply issues before COVID, there's price adjustments that need to happen there. And they clearly happened pretty quickly in some segments because the rebound was pretty astonishing.
It was.
We were looking back a year ago, wondering how we were closing 1,000 sales in a quarter. Like, how did you close when you couldn't be in the room
Right,
with people.
right.
But it shows you how the industry is adapted.
It sounds like you're very optimistic about the real estate market for the next year, at least.
With one major concern.
You don't want to go back to a restrictive economy because of the Delta variant?
Well, no, I mean, nobody does. I know it's no,
that would be
wasn't
harmful.
my major concern. I think that I'm being optimistic that with the level of vaccinations and what's gone on in Europe and the path that their numbers have taken, that we might follow a similar path. And luckily, it seems so far that hospitalizations and deaths aren't rising significantly yet. So maybe that's where the vaccination is helping the most. My concern, and I'm sure your concern too, is bad government policy. I mean, we talk about the pied-à-terre tax, but obviously we had some tax hikes recently that have gone on, and really some anti-real estate legislation, not just to affect brokers, but landlords,
everybody.
And people don't realize the criminal effect it has of the economy. Real estate is the engine that makes the city's economy run. It supplies the city with more revenue than any other.
It's a central nervous system, really.
Right. More than half of the city's revenue comes from property taxes and property-related taxes. It's the goose that lays the golden egg every year.
But don't we have a new city council coming? We have a new mayor coming. Aren't those things going to help us? Don't you think that?
I'm not as optimistic. I think that obviously a new mayor, one that's committed to addressing an issue that's plaguing a lot of cities right now, which is crime, is definitely going to be good for the city. And one of the Partnership for New York did a survey about people returning to work, and most people's biggest concern was riding mass transit. And it wasn't just because of the closeness in COVID. It's a safety issue for a lot of people.
Yep.
So I think that obviously it's going to be Eric Adams, has that commitment, and that could be good for the city. I don't know that the legislation we're going to see coming out of the city council, and certainly coming out of Albany, is going to change.
But the results of the city council are good. I mean, they weren't extreme. We could have had a very progressive, but it seemed like it ended up being more moderate.
Well, let's see. I mean, it's always in the actions.
That's true.
And I think, in Albany, we still have the same governor, so will that really change what we've seen come out of there? In the city council, let's hope that
because
they
that
realize.
determines the budget, right? City council determines the budget for New York City.
Right. Albany's important in terms of tax policy. If the city wants to change pretty much any tax, they have to go through Albany. And that's something that, is concerning at times, because there are senators and assembly members more than happy to introduce tax increases.
Yeah.
But I think there's optimism right now, and I think the city could have a bright future. We've all, I've been working in the city for 30 years, and I've seen it go through its phases, and it's shown a resiliency that is amazing.
It is.
I think it will come back strong, and every time they count us out, it's almost like people just want to prove everybody wrong.
It's true. We're the underdog. We keep stepping up. We keep coming back.
If we could only get the Rangers to win the Stanley Cup.
Is that possible? Could they?
They've won once since 1940. It's like growing up on Long Island as a Ranger fan when the Islanders are winning the Stanley Cup every year. It was brutal.
So,
but
is it possible this year? Could they win?
Well, let's see what they do in the free agent market. We have had some high draft picks. And,
okay. You know way too much about sports. Way too much.
Well, I guess that's where my love of statistics, you could say, started. Was baseball as a kid always was very important, and I think it's almost been too nerdified now with all these sabermetrics and wins above replacement and adjusted OPS. It kind of takes the common fan out. So it's another thing I try to do, when I speak to sales meetings, is try to remember that most people hear numbers and they want to run a lot of times.
It's true.
So we try to focus on what's really important.
Yeah, and that's why I said you're very good at that.
Well, thank you. Tell my boss.
I'm gonna definitely tell your boss. Wait, who is your boss? Alan Kersner? Are you willing to do any imitations before we get into our
I don't know what you're talking about, Bess.
I
don't do any impersonations of anybody.
Okay, all right. I was just,
That would be so wrong.
So, I don't know if you saw the last episode of The Lead, but we talked a little bit, Will and I, about music. And, as we said, he has a vast knowledge of music. And he mentioned in that he probably knows more about music than you.
No, he said he did know more, and because you asked him the question directly. Maybe they could put the clip in. But I look, I'm not going to get into maybe we should have like a music Jeopardy here. Maybe
do that. That's going to be
go. But I do have one up on Will. I'm a musician or want to be a musician.
You play the guitar, right?
I do, and I played the trumpet in college on scholarship. Talk about COVID and things to do. I started to learn jazz guitar, and I've been studying that now for a little over a year and a half, and it's been a very humbling process. But I think with me and Will, we he knows more important people in the music business than I do. I know more about what's in the liner notes, I think, about certain things. And he has me on modern music. I don't listen to really a lot of it.
You both know an enormous amount about music. I will give you that.
Well, I think I know, speaking for myself, I have just a desire. Once I hear something I like, I have to find out everything about that band, who produces them,
dig in,
who played it, and I have so many useless facts about albums in my head that
you know a lot. You do. So tell me, name three of your. I know it's hard to say favorites, but three of your top go-to like groups or artists that you love. Three. Just give me three.
Obviously, the Beatles has been the biggest influence on.
Not the Stones?
I like the Stones.
But you love the Beatles, okay.
The growth that they showed, I mean, think about it, they broke up over 50 years ago, and they're still the biggest band in the world.
That's true.
I think that Chicago had a big influence on me. Being a trumpet
Chicago
player,
just performed at the Beacon.
Yeah, they did. And The Who. The Who is... No band, at least in my life, generates more of an emotional response.
Me too.
Makes me want to kick a chair or slam a guitar or get angry.
One of the best rock and roll bands of all time.
Or some of the more beautiful, and if anybody ever checked out my playlist, I mentioned The Who. I've never seen a better band live. The energy that they generate and the way they just aggressively go at it. And at the same time, write a song like Love Reign O'er Me, which is a really beautiful song about desperation and hope. So I think that's, and lately with jazz, I've become obsessed with Joe Pass.
What's the name?
Joe Pass is a jazz guitar player.
How do you spell the last name?
P-A-S-S.
Joe Pass.
His real name is something real Italian and much longer than that. But he was a guitarist that was just a phenom. Who battled drug addiction for years, spent almost a decade in jail.
Wow.
But he had a way of playing that made it look like anybody could pick it up, and it just is so brilliant. It's just pleasure. He has an album called Virtuoso. You just listen to it, and it's just him.
Wow.
And you would think you'd get bored with that after a while.
But you don't.
And plus, anybody that does something new, I think that's what did it. Why I choose the Beatles over the Stones. Stones do great stuff, but it didn't evolve as much. And the Beatles go from like, I Want to Hold Your Hand to Tomorrow Never Knows in a span of a couple of years. You could say it's the drugs, but they were all on drugs back then.
Well, you have a lot of depth and substance to you, Greg, and feeling and emotion. Who
much
knew?
More shallow than that. I've run out of things, to say about, I'm like anybody else. I wanted to be a pitcher for the Yankees when I grew up. Then I wanted to start the Beatles. If I'd have known grunge music was going to come on, I would have pushed being a musician harder, because those guys had very little talent, I thought.
Except for Pearl Jam and Eddie Vedder.
That Eddie Vedder is the worst, man.
Hey,
come on.
What do you mean?
No,
we're gonna edit this out because
I know you love Eddie.
I love him. Kurt Cobain, I know. Well, let's not get into that. Let's talk a little bit about your reports and some of the stuff that you do. You send out market reports, and you have the line, not the lead, but the line.
Yeah, what did it say? Why don't we just call this show The Best, and then mine can be like second best?
You're just a little footnote at the bottom. But yes, so the line. Tell us about the line. You have a lot. I mean, people love it. I love it. Do you ever see that I write back and I?
No, I've never seen any.
I always write that I love it.
Well, you know what? Nadia in marketing gives me the comments. It doesn't say who they come from.
Oh, okay.
So
I always pick on the green happy face. I always say yes, amazing. I always love it. There's funny stuff in there.
We do get negative feedback every now and then. Some of it's funny.
But it's interesting. And sometimes you put heartfelt things in there. You put in a nice story not too long ago.
Well, I try, one of the things you always get when you go to a sales meeting is sometimes the director will be like, all right, don't depress us.
Yes.
You've got good news for us, right? So when the line started, and we just celebrated our year anniversary, you didn't give me a gift.
There's a bottle of scotch for you in my office.
Until it's in my office,
okay.
It's not really
We'll
helpful.
do that later, transaction later.
Okay, so they said they wanted to start this blog, and I'm like, I do enough stuff for you, leave me alone. But, we've always looked to do this. We were the first, and as far as I know, still the only firm that does economic reports. We had the Heym report all those years.
That's right.
And it was something nobody did, and it was all the information you needed to know, so you didn't have to read all these journals and everything. We just give you the right information. And so we said, all right, let's try to make it, when I speak at meetings, let's try to take some of that and put it in there and be irreverent at times.
I love irreverence. Such a great
Like, for
quality.
example, like baseball's had a record number of no-hitters this year. And the amazing thing is 3 teams have been no-hit twice. 5 of the no-hitters have been on the road. So it's like, wow, that's interesting. It's
Wow.
kind of economics. And then it's like, I have to point out as a Yankee fan that, there's only been 1 Met no-hitter in history, but 2 former Mets have thrown no-hitters for the Yankees. So, get those digs in.
The fact that you know all of this is like you're the Cliff Clavin of
So
information.
I don't know if that's a compliment, but so we try to now have to write one this afternoon about GDP and initial claims. Just tell people what they need to know, try to put some humor in. When I was yelling at Jerome Powell again about ignoring the 30% growth in the money supply, I said he's got to take a lesson from Archie Bell and the Drells, who had a big hit in the 60s with a song called Tighten Up. If you
I don't know that song.
That's called Do the Tighten Up.
Can you sing that for us a little?
But
okay.
you should listen to it because the
Okay.
horns in it are excellent.
Okay.
But, try to do that. I wrote an article about Bobby Bonilla Day. The Mets are still paying Bobby Bonilla $1 million plus a year for 25 years, basically because of Bernie Madoff. So, we try to weave in. And if I see a really inspirational story.
That's what I love those.
We did a
I
story
love
about the first athlete with Down syndrome to finish a triathlon, which
Love
is
that
amazing.
story. That was very heartfelt. A lot of people, I
Yeah.
think, were inspired by that.
No, I at a time people need hope. I just go with what I think is interesting. Hopefully, other people like.
And it's excellent.
And
the agents love it.
I do have one big fan who emails me all the time. Fred Peters loves it.
He does.
He always sends comments, and Fred's not shy about.
And Fred's brilliant, and he's so smart.
He
He writes something for Forbes, and I read every word. I think Fred always gives great commentary. So if he's giving you a compliment, that really says something.
Well, that is nice, yes, and we appreciate even the negative comments, and it's a great team that works on it, and it's taken off. I mean, we have over 3,000.
It helps. Yeah, the agents
readers.
love it. It's good feedback, and I think what you do for the agents is that you give them solid information, things they can work with to go back to buyers with, to go back to sellers with, and help them to explain what's going on in the market in the simplest of terms.
Well, I always tell my staff that if we're not helping the company make money, we're not going to stay here. So everything we do is with that in mind. And when you have an economic crisis, it started with Lehman Brothers. How can we help the agents do their job? They're not all business majors. They don't understand how this stuff works. So coming up with different economic reports and different things to say seem to help. And they're so nice. And, I really got to say how much I love the agents here because of what they do, I get to do what I do, and I kind of like what I do. So that all
They
works
love
out
you.
nice.
You have a huge fan base here. You know that.
I do, actually. And that's hence the big ego. And
So, Greg, let me ask you, are there any mentors that you have in your life? Anybody who's really influenced you?
well, I'd say it started with my dad. I know that sounds cheesy, but my dad has always been the least selfish person I've ever met. Always about family and responsibility. And see, I'm getting emotional talking about it. So he showed me, how you should live your life. It was a good way. Not think about yourself, think about
Love
others.
that.
And that's where the work ethic and everything came from, and my screaming mother. But he'll be mad at me for pointing this out, but Peter Mara has been a mentor to me for many years. I said to Peter, we all know Peter and how blunt
Love
he is.
him.
I
Love
said,
him.
I want you to mentor me. He goes, why would I want to do that? And I'm like, I don't know. I think you know stuff. I remember reading the Jobs biography, and Steve Jobs said one of the mistakes people make is they don't ask for help. And if somebody knows more than you, you should ask them. And
Of course.
I think you need somebody to give you that feedback, especially when you're a boss. Sometimes your staff isn't going to give you that.
Now, people sometimes are worried. They think that they can't give you, but you
Well,
can't.
not my staff, but other staff would be worried.
Criticism is what makes you better. Constructive, not complaining is different than solutions or ask. It's different. Complaining is different than
Well,
criticism.
at a certain level too, we don't get a lot of feedback.
Yes.
I don't necessarily sit down with ownership every year and they tell me what I'm doing good and what I'm doing bad. At this level, that just doesn't happen. So to have somebody say, like, you shouldn't have done this or you should do this. Plus, I know when I came here, I had to negotiate a contract. I never did that before. What do I ask for? What do I get? Am I like a ball player? Do I get a new car? And they're not going to tell me all the things I can get. So you need somebody that's been through that can really advise you of everything like that.
That's right.
And how to handle certain situations. And I'm not shy about asking for advice from people. I don't feel like I need to hide the fact that I might need help with something.
I'm going to point this out to you. That shows that you're willing to be vulnerable. And I came on the show, didn't I? You did come on the show, but a lot of people have a hard time showing because they think it's weakness, or they always want to look like they're strong and they know everything. So that's why you're so successful.
Well, I always tell my son, because I try to, that's my ultimate mentoring, Junior, and nobody calls him that actually, who is a lot like me, which drives my wife nuts. I say every now and then life opens a door and you've got to kick it open and you've got to be prepared. And I think I've been fortunate enough, even though it takes time. I mean, between BLS and Rebney, I sort of felt I wasn't going anywhere for 11 years until I get the phone call from Will. And I think you have to be ready when it's there, and you have to believe in yourself, and you have to be prepared and not get down. I mean, I've applied for jobs I haven't gotten.
Right.
It happens to everybody.
Of course.
And, I think the work ethic, that is the most important thing. I hear my nephew complaining about, I was going to make him watch this too, his internship and how his friends all hate their jobs. Everybody, I'm going to say, most people don't like their first job because you're an apprentice, basically. You're learning something. You're doing the grunt work.
That's right.
It's character building. It's like the guy who sits in the penalty box when the goalie gets a penalty. You don't send a veteran to do that. You send the new guy.
That's right.
And you got to be willing to be that person. And I've always wanted more and more and more. And it's just the drive that my mother, my mother is the type that is always pushing you.
That's right.
Hey, Ma, I got a 98 in this test. Why don't you get 100? What'd you get wrong? You happy getting this wrong? You just want to get this wrong again?
But that's a good thing. The advice I give to my kids and to young people is also, you should pursue what you're good at. People always say, pursue what you love. Don't do that, because I love to sing and I'm a terrible singer. I can do that in my free time, but you should pursue what you're good at. Find out what you're good at and work on that.
Well, and two, I have to give a shout out to Hall for this too, because I met Hall about 25 years ago when I was at Rebney. He was the chair of the Residential Research Committee, so I was doing the reports there. And we don't have a lot in common. Outside, I think we both think I'm smart. But listening to Hall talk about brand, and values of a company was something I had, you work for the government. Like
you never hear that.
The government doesn't have a good brand.
That's right.
Although BLS doesn't have a bad one. That resonated. And, being associated with him at Rebney and now working with him for these years, I've learned a lot from him in terms of those aspects, things that I wouldn't normally think of. I haven't really had data mentors.
Yeah.
At BLS, you're kind of just collecting information, and then at Rebney, I was the chief economist. There was nobody higher up, which is fine because I've had to learn it on my own, which sometimes is not a bad way to learn it. But with the things I don't know about, brand, marketing, a tech. Like the great thing about Martha Stark and my relationship with her is she's taught me so much about property taxes that I didn't know.
That's right. And I bet you taught her things that she didn't know about real estate.
Yeah, and data analysis. I'm trying to get her to use better software than what she uses. But I think, you shouldn't be afraid to ask, and everybody can teach you something, even if it's what not to do. I think everybody, you can learn a lesson from everybody.
I agree with that. And Hall's taught a lot of, he taught a lot of people about brand.
And we've had fights.
I know, I've heard about that.
Oh my God.
Where he, does he get his finger? Did he do any of this?
Paul
I don't give a good guy.
The finger of death, I think.
I've seen him pull that finger out.
So I started the communications department here and hired the staff that started. So the first communications director for BHS, we go to the first sales meeting, which was in Hall's office back then, this tiny place, and I get into it with him. And he starts giving me the finger. Like, I don't know if I can do this.
No, he says, I don't give a good goddamn.
Oh, he would always say, I don't know if I can fire you, but I'm damn sure going to find out if you. And I was like, I said, okay. So we're walking back, and she's like, is it always like that again? No, not always. I think the thing that kept me employed here during some of those fights is the mutual respect. We're not always going to agree, and we're not always going to disagree appropriately. but we're all working for the same thing, and I think it's you have to keep that in mind. Just like you argue with family members and friends.
It's normal. You have to have tension and disputes, and that's hopefully you come to a better resolution of things.
Yes, although I should have pointed the finger back at him every now and then.
Don't ever do that. You don't
don't let the Southern drawl fool you about Hall, when he talks. I got the terrible Long Island accent, so I sound like I'm probably ready to fight, but he's mellowed a bit, so that's been fun.
Paul's the best.
But knowing him that long, so many people here, that's what made it a good fit to come. I knew Hall, I knew Diane, I knew most of the sales directors.
Right.
I mean, Ruth McCoy is like my oldest friend in the business.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
And, it's been great. And knowing Michael Bloom that long, it made it comfortable to come here. The only people I didn't know was basically the owners and the folks at Vanderbilt Appraisal, which was interesting to meet some of them. But it's been great. And, given the freedom to start a couple departments, that appealed to me.
Right. Well,
There's pressure because, wait, they didn't have a research department before I got here.
You're like, so you had to build it from scratch.
And I was leaving a very secure job at Rebney, and it was like, but my ego made me do it.
We're glad that you listened to your ego.
I probably shouldn't listen to it all the time. But it's great to have knowledgeable people around, and also, I always look forward to like the deal of the year, because that's when I see all the people that I've known. I'm sure you guys look forward to it too. Back to my Rebney days.
Those are fun. Hopefully we're going to have a deal of the year this year.
I hope so.
Because we need one of those.
I think we need to be in the room together.
So, Greg, did you bring your guitar or you didn't?
I didn't. It's going to sound wimpy too, but I actually, the skin on my index finger cracked.
Okay.
I don't really have dry hands, but
I
couldn't sit on Sunday at my regular gig. I know it sounds wimpy, but I started to practice the other day and it started bleeding, and I'm like, and I'm supposed to actually sit in tonight with somebody.
You have to wear gloves.
Clapton did that. Clapton had some skin problem at some point. He had to play with gloves. It must feel weird. But the problem with jazz is you tend to use heavier gauge strings, and they can be a little rougher.
So that's your excuse for not having the guitar.
No, I didn't want to schlep it in.
Okay.
Today, by the way, we have thunderstorms predicted.
All right. So you have done a lot of press. You've been on TV you've met a lot of people.
Right.
In closing, will you share with us, do you have any funny stories or anything that you can share with us that would give us a giggle?
I have two funny stories.
Okay, great.
One was I was doing Bloomberg, and you're literally in studio. You're sitting right next to and the reporter thought it'd be fun to question the integrity of my data, basically saying like, Greg, isn't it in your interest to rosy up these numbers so people buy real estate?
Yeah.
And I didn't know where this question. You never know what questions.
You don't know what they're going to.
And I was like, I was mad, because I put a lot of pride in what I do. And I said, basically, like, why would we lie to our clients? They're not going to be our clients for long if we're lying to them.
That's such a good answer.
I said, we spend a lot of time, on our research to give good information. And she started to see I was getting really mad. So when the interview was over, I didn't even say goodbye. I kind of threw the mic down, and I'm walking out. And I was supposed to do Bloomberg Radio.
Yes.
And I'm like, no, I'm not doing this. Forget that. I'm not going to. It's going to ask me questions like this.
It's ridiculous.
They can get somebody else on there. And our communications person at the time, who worked for me, so she had to be careful, was like, you kind of got to do it. So, and I go in the radio booth, and this guy was in Washington, I think, and he goes, Greg, it's so-and-so. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask those questions. I watched tape back. You couldn't see it was upset. But the funny thing is the other Barbara Corcoran story. I was doing a NBC remote spot. I think people don't realize, like, when you're remote, a lot of times you're in like an empty office by yourself and nothing but a camera there.
Yeah.
So they had like this makeshift green room, and the communications director's like, you should put some makeup on. I'm like, it's not in studio. I'm not putting makeup on. So then a couple minutes later, in walks Barbara Corcoran. So I introduced myself, and she says she knew who I was. I don't know. Maybe she was lying. But she goes, oh, I'm going to argue with you. And it's like, but if you don't mind, I got to put my makeup on. So the communications person, I told you to put makeup on. So Barbara goes, pushes me down in the chair and puts makeup on me.
She put makeup on you?
Yeah, and the whole time she's like dotting my face with all this stuff. And she's like, if you don't like the lighting in there, you walk out of the room. I'm like, well, I didn't start a company, so maybe I shouldn't. And if you, so the banter, like I've had
that wasn't your priority.
No, I was like nervous,
Yes.
to do this thing.
Yeah.
And I've had some fun in green rooms. I had a great conversation with Jesse Jackson once in a green room.
Wow.
At Fox. And another interesting story was I was doing Neil Cavuto's show, and the guest that was supposed to be on with me was running late. Actually had to run out of a car once to get to a studio on time. So Cavuto goes, Greg will handle it. And this woman was like talking about credit scores and lending. So I said, okay. So these reporters usually aren't paying attention to you.
Right.
Like you're answering their question and they're doing this.
Right.
And there's all these people around, like eating lunch or whatever they're doing. So while I'm talking, the person just arrived. They're wheeling her in. Like they're really just slowly wheeling her in as I'm pretending I don't see this. And then she like magically appeared. I'm like this. So I think that, the guys in marketing used to have fun with some of my clips. It's one of those things you don't realize how hard it is until you're live.
That's right.
And you realize all the distractions, even the teleprompters they're reading from. Like you get caught looking at it yourself, and
it's hard. It's a lot. People think the ones that are really good at it, like you, make it look easy, but it's really it's stressful. And I think preparation is key to your success. You have to know what you're talking about.
And take deep breaths. I mean, the problem is
deep breaths.
You're sitting in a green room for a half an hour or more. You spent all morning like prepping.
Yeah.
And then
and then they ask you a question that you weren't expecting.
And then it's like over.
Yeah.
And then you have all this energy.
You're like, okay, what are we doing next?
Like, all right, what are we doing?
Yes.
And then you go back and watch it and hope it's
good.
It's good. I'm like,
sometimes you don't know. You're like, was that good? Was I bad? I don't know how I was. You don't know. You're in the zone, so you don't really know.
You don't, and people have a tendency to think they did worse than they actually
always
did. And I tell my son that all the time when he does these auditions. You're always going to think you did worse.
That's okay.
It's it's a lesson I taught him. My son, actually, they have these NISMO auditions every year to be an all-county or all-state player, and he had one that he was very upset at, and the adjudicator wouldn't let him sit. Trumpet players like to sit down. He's like, no, you stand. It'll sound better. And my son was young. He was in elementary school at the time.
So it threw him off, I'm sure.
It threw him off, and he wound up, he's in tears when he came out of the room. It's like, it was so terrible. I said, no, I heard most of it. It wasn't that bad. And I said, look, you prepared. You did everything you're supposed to do. Whatever you get, you should be proud.
That's it.
He got a great score and made all county. Of
course. You always think it's worse than.
Yeah.
Well, Greg, first of all, I love talking to you. I always do. You're interesting. You're funny. You have a lot of care in your heart. You can see that. And you're just
I'm only being nice because it's you. If it was somebody else,
we're so lucky to have you at Brown Harris Stevens. The agents, we all appreciate and respect you. You're an incredible guy. Thank you for sitting with me and doing this. Let's see what our ratings are for number 3 interview.
Of course it's going to be number 1.
Thank you, Greg.
Always
You're
a pleasure,
best.
Bess.
Appreciate it.
I can't argue with that.
Okay.